Corporate Select Committee, Wednesday the 21st of January 2026. I'm Councillor Dan Roper, Chair of the Strategic and Corporate Select Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting. This meeting is being held in person at County Hall and is also being streamed live on the County Council's YouTube channel. A fire alarm test is not expected during the meeting. If the alarms sound, we must evacuate County Hall. In the event of an emergency, please make your way to the nearest exit and meet at the muster points located on the main car park. Item 1, apologies.
Does Andrew's work?
You press them once, press them again, then they'll come on.
Thank you, Chair. We have an apology today from Councillor Andrew Jameson.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Councillor Jameson has been struck down by the lurgy. He messaged me earlier this morning to say that he wouldn't be able to make today, and get well soon, Andrew. We also have apologies today from the Leader of the Council, Councillor Kay Mason-Billig. I spoke to her on Monday and completely accept the reason why she can't be here today, and we wish her well. Okay, item number 2 is the minutes, the non-exempt minutes of the meeting on the 19th of November 2025. Are we content with those, councillors? I see nods around the room, so that's all good. Okay, number 3 is updates from the Chair. First, can I welcome Councillor Carl Smith to the committee for your first meeting? I hope you find it interesting, if not enjoyable. Can I say that we previously mentioned at our meetings about the local government finance settlement? An update will be provided on that as context in the budget papers rather than a standalone written briefing. This is to avoid duplication. One other announcement from me as the Chair is, as this committee is responsible for the fire and rescue service, just to say that on the 1st of December, I had the privilege of attending the first unveiling of a red plaque in the county of Norfolk at the Chequers Public House in Hainford. This was to commemorate the tragic loss of firefighter Christopher Betts while attending a fire at the pub on the 1st of December 1987. It was a very moving and special event that absolutely brought home the risks our firefighters face on a daily basis to keep our community safe. And I'd like to commend everybody who was involved in organising such a special event. The plaque was unveiled by Christopher's father, Mr. William Betts, himself a dedicated long-serving firefighter based at Wroxham from 1942. Very sadly, Mr. Betts Sr. passed away on the 10th of January this year, aged 98, and I'm sure I speak for the whole committee in adding our condolences to the many tributes that have been paid to him. Thank you. Item 4, any declarations of interest, please? I see none. Number 5 is public question time. There were no public questions received. And number 6 is local member questions. There were no local member questions received. Which brings us then to item number 7, local government reorganisation, scrutiny and risk considerations. There is a report in front of you from the Chief Executive. And I'll ask, is it Sarah going to present? Over to you, please, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So hopefully you'll remember, those who were on the committee at the time, at the last committee we started to talk through some of the decision-making routes that are anticipated once we have a decision on local government review. We still don't have a decision from government and it's not due until March, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue our thinking and continue to get things ready. This report is on that theme. This report is more of a discussion report at this stage, and you'll see we've put a number of questions, suggested questions for you.
I'm going to pause for a moment, Sarah. Please carry on.
We've put a number of suggested discussion questions in the report, which may or may not be helpful, and of course it's up to you whether you work through them or you have additional questions. What we've set out in the appendices is what we see the scrutiny role being as we move through different phases of the programme. So what's the role of scrutiny between having a decision and setting up the formal government-defined governance arrangements that we talked about last time, how things may change slightly when we get to a shadow authority or authorities, throughout the process. But what's very clear is there is a scrutiny role throughout the whole process up to vesting day of new council or councils that's in addition to your current scrutiny workload. So the work to scrutinise existing council service delivery does not stop and should not, and we need to make sure that's not diluted because services need to continue to be delivered, but there is an extra scrutiny workload that I'm sure you'd want to be involved in. You'll see in those scrutiny roles that risk appears a lot, and there's quite a lot in there around considering the big risks and the approach that's being taken to mitigating those risks throughout the programme. So what we've also included in the appendices is the risks that were identified in the 3 business cases that were submitted. So not just the County Council's business case, but also the business cases for 2 unitaries and 3 unitaries, just to give you an idea of the initial thinking around where the big risks may lie. They're absolutely not fully formed risk registers, and that work will be done quite quickly after we get a government decision, but it will give you an indication of what the early risks and where the earlier focus is like to be around risk management as we move forward to decision. And I'll stop there, Chair, and let the committee discuss as you wish.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, this is a standing item on our agenda, and for good reason, because it's incredibly important for the future of local government and delivery of services in Norfolk. Timing is never good when these matters come to the committee. They can only ever be a snapshot of where we are at the time, so that always limits how far the committee can go on a particular occasion. But thank you for the report, and I see Councillor Long indicating.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you to officers who've prepared this, for this meeting. And you know, I do question with the sort of omni-shambles that we have in terms of devolution, possibly with LGR. We don't know yet whether March will be the date that we actually find out. We don't know yet whether or not the government will not allow us to have elections in May. You know, everything is up in the air, yet we're being asked to scrutinise it. And, you know, I think this is ahead of when we really need it, because obviously once we get past eventually finding out whether it's 1, 2 or 3 as far as LGR is concerned, we will then be in a much better place to focus where scrutiny needs to be. We'll have more indication of whereabouts, you know, the financial risks will be, obviously depending on what's being proposed, because we'll then start to formulate exactly how much this process that's being forced upon us is going to cost. And it's not going to cost, of course, it's going to cost the taxpayers of Norfolk. Government is not putting a penny into any of this, and we're expected to sort it out from perceived savings that might happen following the reorganisation. Well, there may well be some savings, but you know, who knows how many years it will take to recoup. But we've got to fund it in the meantime, and that, to me, is one of the biggest considerations in all of these reports, is that financial risk and how we manage to mitigate that for the number of years until we get transformed into whatever comes along, 1, 2 or 3 in terms of unitaries. But of course, given the fact that we put an awful lot of effort to getting the devolution programme ready, website set up, looking at recruiting staff for the new authority, everything ready to go for the for election this May, and government has reneged on what they said they would do, and they've moved that date forward. And once again, the costs of that, well, possibly we will get some reimbursement for that, because we were on the priority programme. Gosh knows what would look like if we weren't on the priority programme, but I don't see much priority in holding elections in 2028 for something that we could have had up and running this year. That's all I've got to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Long. I'm not sure there was too many questions in there, but Simon wants to come in.
Thank you. So I think to Councillor Long's point, government is still very strongly saying that they are committed to LGR, both for us and other areas which aren't in the DPP area. There was a ministerial presentation that a number of us attended yesterday, where again the Minister emphasised her commitment to this process. I guess what we have done as part of our learning and benchmarking is that areas that haven't performed well during unitary government are very often ones that took their eye off the ball with the day-to-day activity, with the stuff that councils were doing. And I guess that's kind of very human, is actually people want to work in this, you know, they're kind of attracted by the newness, the shininess, but actually fundamentally the sovereign councils need to continue to empty the bins, they need to look after social care, you know, they need to keep turning the handle. So very much that's where kind of our learning has come from. We've been working with colleagues from across all districts around putting in the infrastructure, regardless of what that decision might be, so that when we get that call, and we'll probably get the call about a couple of hours before it's announced, but whenever we get that call, we are then ready to actually to put in place the sort of meetings, the arrangements, and we've done some of the thinking, and that's very much the purpose of this paper, is to start to tease out actually what you think as experienced members would be good things to follow. Finally, just on cost, we are though very much aware, you know, we are not spending a lot of money on this. There are no external consultants across districts or ourselves working on it. It is officers doing this in terms of comment. So very much aware that until we've got that government decision, actually we've got a responsibility to keep money down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Over to Councillor Morphew.
Thank you, Chair. And whilst and apologies for my voice, by the way, whilst I wouldn't necessarily agree with Councillor Long's colourful and loaded language, there is no doubt there's an awful lot of uncertainty around in the system. And I think it's right that we're not going to be able to pin this down. I wonder whether or not there would be some value, though, in giving ourselves, or finding a way of giving this committee, some sort of a general power of convening things, so that when we do get some information and when we do get something that breaks, whether or not it's something we know, something we expect, something that comes out of left field, who knows, that we can actually do something about it. Because I am concerned that we will finish up with a decision, an announcement, and nobody's actually got the power to do anything, and there isn't a committee meeting coming for some time. So and maybe I look to the monitoring officer, is it possible to include some sort of a general power of convening so that somebody can do something if we need to?
I'll consider that and get back, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Morphew?
Not for the time being, Chair. I'm happy with that.
Okay, thank you. But the point is entirely taken in terms of actually how prepared the authority is in terms of responding to any announcements which take place. And that's an important area. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must agree with everything really that Councillor Long has said there. It is a bit of a car crash at the moment, everything going on, and being a district leader, knowing that, and like Simon says there, you know, lots of work going on right across the Norfolk, involving all councils and that. And I know that Norfolk leaders actually will be meeting on Monday to discuss stage 3, which is the establishment and operation of joint committees and that. And there's a meeting with all of us, all the leaders there on Monday to discuss this and how we move forward. I think the one thing which concerns me really is, with all this uncertainty that is still going on, and let's be fair, we've been told it may be March when we hear, is how it's affecting all the staff right across Norfolk as well. You know, because we have a duty of care really to our staff. You know, there's lots of certain uncertainty. I know that in Great Yarmouth I keep having regular meetings with staff, but I think it's really important that we think of all the staff that works across all the councils and how that is affecting them, you know, and what their position will be, you know, however many unitaries that there are. And I think I'd like the committee to take that as well into consideration when we move forward. Thank you.
So one of the things we'll like to discuss with members, with the leaders on Monday, is an event that we are looking at with other colleagues to actually bring some of those key affected staff together prior to any decision, so that actually we move from what was a competitive process, and let's be honest, it was a competitive process, but actually, as Councillor Smith said, both leaders and officers and the officers involved in this have moved on. they are moving on to actually how do we as public servants get on and deliver this and make sure that on day one of the new council or councils, you know, the things that really matter continue to happen. Just internally in terms of NCC, there has been quite a lot of staff engagement. There have been presentations from Tom and some of our senior leaders for staff, sort of interactive sessions. And obviously once we know what the decision is, there's a cascade of information that's being prepared, and that is targeting staff in very different ways, because we know actually for some staff this will be a really big issue. So, you know, to be frank, a lot of people sitting in this room, it will affect quite significantly. To be frank, for some people it will be a change of logo on top of their payslip. So what we're trying to do is make sure actually that we've got really targeted comms and really targeted support for staff. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll piggyback onto people's questions, by the way, Carl. You'll get used to this. So just picking up on that last answer, just in terms of what can staff expect then when an announcement comes out, in terms of how quickly will there be some communication from the organisation to put minds at rest?
Once almost straight away. So I think the experience in other areas is that they were notified the evening before. And we would obviously look then to get comms out so that actually the first thing staff see when they unlock their computer, when they log on, are messages around it. And we've obviously drafted, those messages are drafted and ready to go.
Thank you. Councillor Proctor.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Now, there's been some important points raised already, but as the Chairman said initially, this is a snapshot of where we currently are. And to be fair, the committee asks for this to be on the work programme on a regular basis, i.e. every meeting. So what we've got is the update of what we know currently. And I think it's fair to say that the Strategic and Corporate Select Committee is the right place to have this overview and oversight. I know there's been the member briefings, one of which was held on Friday, which wasn't particularly well attended. But to my mind, those briefings should continue along the lines they have been already. Not everybody sits on this committee, and so there's an opportunity to access those briefings. The other point I just want to get into context is the financial aspects of this. On page 21, paragraph 3.9, about the financial risks and also companies, which I'll come to in a minute. But I think we do need to get some context around this. I was on a LGA seminar last week, as was Sarah Roden as well, and the Cabinet member from North Yorkshire said that they put aside £38 million for doing whatever they were doing. There was not much detail around it, but 38 million was the figure. I think they've spent 28 million of that so far. What he was a bit reluctant to give any detail about, and probably because he didn't know, perhaps it hadn't happened either, was the savings. And to be fair to everybody, you're not going to make savings in year one or even year two, year three perhaps, but they will be there. So I think we need to put this in the context of finances. So if, for example, unitarisation comes in, then somebody somewhere, i.e. the authorities together, will have to front the money. So we do need to be very aware of how much the initial costs will be. There's also the mention of company, and there was a bit of a flavour to that in page 35 of the report when it talks about waste contracts and what needs to be done. So we all have companies. We've got, the County Council have got companies, the districts have got companies as well. So we do need to make sure that risk is there in how we deal with it. There probably is a way. In fact, I could probably know a way, but let's see what happens for the future. I'll talk to the relevant people in due course. The other thing I just want to mention is about the timing of this. Now, the next full meeting, apart from the budget meeting, is on the 18th of March. So if we get a decision on or about the 11th of March, there'll be time to get some sort of paper together, or there'll probably have to be about a few days before that. So, well, there may or may not be something. You may have prepared something in advance just in case, but who knows? So the issue there is what actually gets prepared. But I suppose the difficulty really is knowing what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, what the next stages are. But as far as where we go from this, Chairman, the point really is this is the right place that we need to have these continuing updates, and we also must make sure we get the member briefings on a regular basis where there's something positive and relevant to say. And just going back quickly on that, I know the one on Friday didn't actually cover devolution, but then Paul did do a brief introduction. I think we need to make sure that we are aware of what the devolution situation is as well. This is purely on LGR, but the work programme did say devolution as well. So we must make sure that what we get in terms of updates does cover the two, and so we know exactly where we are. But as far as the points are concerned, Chairman, I think the discussion points are fairly straightforward, points 1 to 5. And as I said, this is where the committee ownership is. And then that point 6, discussion point 6 rather, in paragraph 3.9, is really emphasising the financial risks and putting that into context of what others have spent. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to respond? I think that's fairly rhetorical. Councillor Hempsall, you.
Good morning, Chairman. I'm sorry, I feel really frozen. So my one question is, and I'm picking up from what Councillor Murphy said, because as this is a standing item on the agenda, there will be moments like today when it all feels a bit, you know, paraphrasing from what everybody else has said, but a bit of a dog's dinner. It just feels really confused. Everything's up in the air, and at some point, you know, all of these balls, plates are going to land in a certain place. I'm slightly reluctant to support any motion that would, you know, regarding the power of convening, because I think ultimately, if there are things to be done about any government decisions, I believe, Kat, those lie with the executive of this council and not particularly this committee. In terms of having an opinion or being informed, I presume any changes will be communicated to members through the briefings. So I'd just like a bit of clarity on that, please. Thank you.
As I've said, I'll come back with any information on any sort of power of convening. But yes, many decisions are executive decisions that sit with the executive. Thank you.
Thank you. Just around that, I mean, I mentioned some conversation I had with the monitoring officer around a linked matter. I mean, for example, about the letter which the leader has sent to the government, the one on Thursday, for example. And just some conversations that we had about actually where the governance sat around that and where it fitted in terms of the delegations which were there for the leader, or whether it needed to be placed elsewhere, and whether there needed to be any scrutiny around that. I think it's something we have to have in mind through all of the decision making within this. For example, I know from discussions with district leaders that there is already some conversations about what might go in the structural change order, even at this early stage is happening. And yet those conversations are happening in the background and aren't actually reaching any members who actually can hold their leaders to account over that in terms of the governance structures. So I do think there is an important point here, and that things are going to move so quickly probably with LGR once that announcement is made, that there is the right tools in place that members actually have oversight over things, that decisions are taken by the right people in the right places, and that scrutiny happens in the right places and at the right times. That's just my thoughts on the matter. I'll go over to Councillor Morphew next.
Thank you, and it's actually to entirely reflect what you just said. I mean, the idea is of the convening power is to make sure that we get the opportunity to talk about stuff that we want to talk about, rather than have it dictated to us by anywhere else or waiting for somebody else to make a decision. I'm not trying to circumvent any other decision-making process or undermine the cabinet process or anything else. It's just making sure that we can have timely discussions on the things that are important at a time that's in a way that suits this committee, actually, because if we are going to have the oversight and responsibility for this, then I think we need to make sure that we do have the flexibility to actually exercise that. However, I did have another question. Associated with the risks that are listed there, I think they need to be drilled down into in a bit more detail. I'm not sure that today is the right place to do it, but for example, there does seem to be an awful lot of risks associated with the 3 model, which actually would apply to the single unitary model as well. So that kind of begs the question, who owns this list of risks? Is there a risk register? Who actually is responsible for it? Who's going to be doing the work on examining those risks and making sure that they are properly looked at, mitigated, and the context of them is reviewed as developments arise? And I assume the answer is here, but I'd just like to make sure that we've got that properly recorded.
Thank you. I mean, I certainly see the risks that outlined as a work in progress, and they go as far as they can at this stage without knowing actually what the model is going to be. But I think it's a very pertinent question around when is a risk register going to be pulled together and what the oversight of it's going to be.
And I agree, Chair. I think it is work in progress. And if you think of local government review a bit like a major project, so when setting up a major project, that's one of the key things you do quite early on is get a really good, robust risk register. That will be one of the very early actions post-decision. In terms of where does it go, I think we've set out in Appendix A in the scrutiny role, at every phase we've got this committee, you know, considering risks, reviewing the mitigation for risks and keeping their eye on the risk register. So we'd see that as early stuff to come through once it's developed.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go off just slightly. I've got you, Councillor Hempsall. That's fine. Just because we're talking about actually future arrangements in terms of where we discuss things and how, and that's rather covered by discussion points 1 and 2 within the papers in front of us in terms of where actually the scrutiny of LGR and the decisions sit. Are we content as a group with the discussion points 1 and 2 and the assumptions built in those, which I imagine we are? Seeing nods in the room. Okay, so that's agreed. Okay, that then gives us a firm foundation actually to have these more conversations, because we'll know exactly where things are going to go. Okay, I had Councillor Price, then I've got Councillor Hempsall, and then Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of the points have been made, so I thank colleagues for making those. I just, you know, looking at discussion points 1 and 2, being discussion, I'll discuss them now rather than jumping ahead to agreement. But yeah, in essence, yeah, I agree. So for myself, it's really important that we don't work in a silo, and we also don't silo things. Also, we've got to understand that this process is going to ebb and flow. And points have been made about it will move very quickly after we get announcements. So there's going to be ebb and flow. So my view on it is we need to utilise the overall skills of the council, but make this the reporting point. So for myself, I would see that the committee can be a clunky process, setting up meetings, full agendas and stuff. So I do support the idea of having a working group which can meet in between and to then report back, because there's high-level conversations we can have, and you can only go so far in a 2-hour meeting with other agenda points, and our agendas are quite full through the time. So we can have extra meetings here in a wider public sense, but we can also have smaller working groups that can deep dive into things, and then that report can come back here as a high-level point to be discussed and ratified. So we need to have the oversight. Equally, kind of utilising other committees which have more expertise and focus in certain areas as they crop up is important. So we need to have an oversight of certain issues, of all the issues, and have those meetings probably in the subgroup to kind of delegate out where certain things should go. I think that's fairly important. There's this whole kind of point about is there going to be an election or not, and the mandate for councillors, and this is about moving towards a new council, which will be, potentially elected next year. So I do think that any working group needs to incorporate all of the elected parties, and it should also be politically neutral. And the reason for that is that it is becoming harder for us to sit here and say that the people who are chair and vice chair and cabinet are the choices of the people who, that when they go to the polls, and also the choices of the people they will select to run the new unitary. So I think that if elections are delayed, that a lot of this needs to have political neutrality associated with it. So no, administration has extra members and such like. So there's no one voice dominating, right? So I think that's something for consideration. Okay, in terms of having a working group that reports back. So then we in this elected format can have that wide-ranging kind of understanding of that particular issue we've asked to be drilled down. I also think it's important with that oversight, if we've asked other committees to kind of do work, that we receive a report back, obviously, but also I think the chair's role in this is absolutely crucial. So I think if I was chairing it and I felt that we were delegating out to another committee, I'd want to attend that. I'd want to participate on that item, so I hear firsthand what happens and I can contribute to that, and then I can report back to my committee. So a few points there. I think working groups need to be able to come together to drill down deeper. In terms of the risk, again, that's something where we should also utilise internal audit officers and the audit process, and we should be able to delegate some work out across, but again, that should be reporting back here. So small working groups that meet in an ad hoc basis when there is an intense amount of work, which are fairly politically neutral, and also utilising the other committees so that we don't get bogged down or we don't take our eyes off of our bread and butter work at this committee. I'm fully supportive of having extra committee meetings, but remember, as I said at the beginning, we are high level and we have 2 hours. So the work needs to happen elsewhere, and then we need to kind of filter that work here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you on that. I certainly hear the point that probably in terms of member input, we maybe need a more dynamic structure than the formal meetings that we have at the moment, and that does lend itself to some form of subgroups, whether it be purely from this committee or from the other select committees or some amalgamation. One of the problems we've got in terms of what you're saying about representation on those is that we are, of course, now a multi-group council, and that would rather defeat the small word as far as working groups goes, because as soon as all groups start getting represented, we actually would have a lot of people around the table in all of those. But I think that is something for the officers and the chairs of the select committees to take away, to think about actually what could be useful in terms of a working group structure to assist in the delivery as far as LGR is concerned. And I'll just leave that point there. I know, Councillor Kemp, you've been waiting a long time.
Thank you. Well, my questions and concern, which I would have liked to see drill down a bit more in the reports, is about the financial impact, how we are going to pay for reorganisation. Our own report, for example, says that reorganising into 3 unitaries could cost 50 million or more. Now, we don't have that money. And where would it come from? Is the government expecting councils to draw up lists of property and to sell them? In which case, how is that value for money, selling fixed assets for some sort of airy-fairy reorganisation that may not deliver the savings because of the fact that Norfolk is so large and the cost of delivering to rural areas means that these economies of scale might not be met. I think we need to be far more honest with the Norfolk people as to the implications of this, of their community assets being sold off, buildings in their parishes or towns. Has the government actually asked councils to do that? And what is the financial reality behind this? Because I think this is something we're all ignoring. It's the elephant in the room. We can't deliver local government reorganisation without a massive injection of cash that we just haven't got. How is this value for money? And can you just sort of tell us what the government thinking is, how we're actually going to fund this?
Over to you, Harvey.
Thank you very much for the question. I wish I had a crystal ball and I could tell you all the answers to that, but unfortunately I cannot. Clearly, the cost of moving towards unitary local government will depend upon which option is chosen by the government, and we don't know what that is yet. As you would expect officers to do, we have made the points that you've raised to government about the cost of this and the ability and affordability. The response from government to date has been that it expects local areas to fully fund this. Now, you can all have a form of view on that, and clearly, as I said, we have indicated to government, that we would, like some funding towards the transition costs. But at this moment in time, we are in the government's hands. In terms of how that will be funded, well, that will, as I said, will very much depend upon what option is ultimately implemented. Clearly, there is, councils will have to look at what reserves they've got, what are their revenue budgets, and how to fund the cost, because we will have no choice but to deliver it. What that may mean is other aspects of services that councils would ideally like to deliver will either have to be deferred or delayed while we make this significant change. But unfortunately, there is no easy answer, and there is no large pot of money available to do that. What we will do as officers, and also it will come to members for decision, is look at what is the best way of funding this when we know what we're actually trying to implement, which, as you've highlighted, we don't know at this stage. I don't think there's much more I can say. I appreciate it's not a very full answer, but I think that just reflects where we are at this moment in time.
Well, thank you, Chair. And if I just might ask, how much money has the government already given towards the financial reports? Is it 300,000 that's been given to councils to do their options reports and so on, please?
I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but it's in that order. Yes, they have given money to councils. They gave money to councils submitting each bid, so each authority, I think, received around £100,000 to support them with their bids. As I said, we have made the case about the cost of transition and would look for government to help support that. But at this moment in time, they've been completely silent on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair, would it be possible for us to have that figure, please?
I think Councillor Smith thinks he can answer that.
The government did give us around about 350,000, I think it's 360, and the leaders decided across that would be split between the three bids, so the county with their one proposal, South Norfolk with their two, and the six got the money divided between the three. That was decided at Norfolk leaders. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I've got a feeling I might have missed a hand from Councillor Hempsall. Did you have another point you wanted to raise, Councillor Hempsall? Sorry.
No, it's fine. All of my questions have been answered. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of detailed points, really. Certainly in terms of the risk register, yes, I think everybody agrees with that, and it needs to be done. And we've got some specialist risk people in the county council to do that. One point that really sort of struck me was in the reference to community engagement risk on page 31 and the structural change order, about how much could go in the structural change order to make sure that could be done, because there's a prime example of what didn't happen in community engagement in Somerset, where the proposal in the business case was to set up these community engagement panels or whatever, and it never happened. So I'm not sure whether they're happening now, but they certainly didn't at the time they were supposed to. So there's a big question mark around that. The other sort of detailed question is whatever number of unitaries there will be, does TUPE apply to staff moving from one authority to the other? And then the other point I just want to make is about the learning side. Well, obviously Surrey are going through their process at the moment with the shadow elections in May, so there's some learning from there. North Yorkshire will probably be a good place to get some learning from too. And also the LGA do some quite decent seminars around this with input from various people. About an hour or so these things last. And occasionally you do get questions, but sometimes you put a question in which looks too difficult to answer and it gets bounced out. But that happened to me last time. But that's the way it is. So I suppose, you know, in terms of learning, then there are plenty of opportunities for us to learn to make sure that by the time May and onwards comes, we do get some plenty of resource to get. Thank you.
Chair, I think we're going to split that between three of us. So Simon do learn, and if Kat's got an answer on the Tewkesbury question. On the neighbourhood boards, so you're right, what we've seen in some other areas is some promises being made around neighbourhood boards and a big lag of time for those to be put in place. I don't think I've seen any areas where they just haven't done it, but I've certainly seen areas where actually they've taken quite a phased approach. They might say they're going to do something across a large area, and then they pick a pilot area and haven't moved on very far from there. From our point of view in the single county unitary bid, we included a lot of information around our proposal on neighbourhood engagement and neighbourhood boards, actually a number of appendices. We had a consultant do work for us. We've made a really, really strong commitment that that's the right thing to do and we want to do it. I know the chief executive remains in the place that's absolutely the right thing to do, and we would like to see that happen. I don't think it's something that government would want to nail down in any structural change order, but we'd be happy to suggest that they did that to try and make sure that we actually delivered what we promised. I think it's an early discussion, if that's the option that government want to pursue. We want an early discussion with government about how they ensure that we actually do it, that we deliver what we've promised, because we think some of those things are fundamental to having a full county unitary. But you're right, in other areas there has been quite a long phased approach. I mean, whilst we may need a phased approach in the scenario here, I wouldn't envisage it being quite so long.
Interesting expression, that long phased approach.
Yeah, in terms of TUPE, usually it is legislative rather than left to the TUPE provisions. So essentially, usually there's a line in a structural change order or in other secondary legislation which clearly transfers all staff to the new entity. Thank you.
And in terms of learning, we have been doing a lot. It's fair to say actually there are a number of colleagues who have been through unitary government, unitarisation, and delivered it. So, for example, there's some senior colleagues in Kings Lynn who've actually been involved in it and delivered it from a finance side. Our chief exec has been through it twice. We'd probably also actually say MHCLG have actually been very good around sharing some of the learning and trying to actually avoid people reinventing the wheel. I guess our note of caution is that history is always written by the victors, and there's a certain sense that actually a lot of the people we meet are currently employed by those unitary authorities and tell us what a wonderful job they did and how it was a smooth and painless transition. And I guess actually sometimes that's not particularly useful from a programme perspective. You actually want to know what went wrong, what they do differently. And we've achieved that by we've actually gone out and we've got some quite specialist people, so actually people who've delivered things. So, for example, we had someone who delivered the IT change for the IT lead for Wiltshire come in and talk to our IT colleagues around actually what were the bear traps, what actually just was really complicated and difficult. And we found actually that's been a kind of really helpful way of learning alongside some of those sort of generic kind of programme and change learnings that we've picked up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had one other hand, and that was Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of picking up sort of around discussion point 4 and 5 a little bit. We've got one more meeting in March before the change of this council if election goes ahead. And so I think that I saw watched the video back on from Friday, and I think that was a useful conversation for wider members around where we were at. Paul had put it on for us, and that was good. So the way polling is going, okay, if we have a general election and polling kind of holds up, we could well see a completely different kind of administration post the election. So that's a high possibility. So for officers to consider rather than politicians for a moment. And so 3 of the people in this room have been in opposition councillors and have then stepped into administration. So I think that they'll probably be better positioned than I to testify about what a leap it is to become administration, the step up in work, skills, training, knowledge and areas of coverage to take on that role is huge. But then at the same time, so you could have very new councillors coming in who have great less respect than these individuals had as opposition councillors coming in potentially, but then also coming up to speed on LGR. So I would say that we will know by March whether or not an election is going to be happening. By that meeting, I think it will have had to have been called, or I think maybe it's up to 1 week later. But I think we'll know by then. So I guess from my perspective, I would want an assurance that there was a programme in place for a change of administration, which not only encompasses the great level of work they would have to take on and skills and stuff to become an administration, but around the whole nuances of the LGR process and programme that's going to be go ahead. So that's a long-winded way of asking that. But then the second minor point is that I think the engagement on Friday was great, okay, but I do think that we need to keep improving the engagement, and it's just a kind of a just in case, because there's a lot of people that may be backbench or not involved so much, which then may have a much more significant role in the LGR process moving forward. So I don't think we've done anything wrong, but I think perhaps that we make at least one kind of mandatory requirement to turn up to something might be a good one, where we have a debate, and maybe that is for just post. Knowing if we've got an election and knowing what the minded to is, because I think that's a tipping point. And I would also suggest that we actually invite in senior officers or / senior councillors, if they can provide time, from organisations that have actually just done this process, so we can really do a sort of Q&A about what they found their pitfalls were and hear that kind of real honesty. So as councillor to another councillor or to officers that have done it, we can really ask the questions of people that have done it and get some insights at this councillor level, at this decision-making level. So a couple of points there about future engagement and preparedness for post-election administrations.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the preparation for election, is clearly at the moment we're expecting elections. That's what the legislative position is. It's a routine part of our planning, both in terms of, you'll see, led by the Chief Executive, engagement as you get nearer to the election, understanding different parties' manifestos, etc., so we can be ready to implement those. And there's already planning underway through our DEM services colleagues for member induction, member education programmes, and we're starting to plan and prepare for those, of course. So in terms of the routine transition, that's what officers do every electoral cycle. In terms of your points around wider engagement, we do have a sense of engagement and cascade that Simon and Sarah have alluded to earlier, both for staff and members, and we'll take those thoughts into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I had one last hand, I think, from Councillor Morphew.
Thank you, Chair. Possibly comments, but I think I might be the only councillor here who's been, part way through a local government reorganisation with the Unitary Council in Norwich, even though it was stymied kind of halfway through. And let me absolutely testify that the amount of work that there is involved in setting up a Unitary Council is absolutely astronomical. And compared to what we are facing, whatever is coming down the line, whatever model it is, what I was involved in was considerably small fry. So be under no illusions about what is coming. I think it's probably the most exciting, important and useful thing that's happened in a number of decades. But be under no illusions, this is not a walk in the park. This is serious stuff. Which really takes me to, how do we prepare for this? And I say, I'm not sure if it's comment, but the workforce issues are clearly huge. And not just the concern that the workforce have got, but also the amount of work that there's going to be in making sure that people are in the right place at the right time and settled doing the right things. Now, whether it's GP structural change order or just kind of reorganisation, over a period of time, there's going to be an awful lot of change and a lot of concern. A lot of people who will be looking for clarification, maybe appeals and all that sort of stuff. Now, certainly in my background, a long time ago, I was a full-time union officer. And I know that Cracknell over there has been through umpteen reorganisations in previous lives. There were processes already in place for these things to happen, joint machinery, so that we know that there are procedures, there are processes. We have actually got the unions around the table, we know who they're dealing with, and whether or not it's 1, 2 or 3, whether the staff are moving from districts to county or the other way around, or some other sort of convoluted mechanism around that, we know what the process is going to be, and at least we can tell staff what the pathway is, where their level of representation is, where their sort of gateways are. Then we could actually take that a long way forward and speed the process up and take out at least some of the uncertainty that's there. Are we doing that now? And if not, shouldn't we be?
So, in terms of, first of all, in terms of our own staff, there is a work stream that's led by Sarah Tuff as one of our executive directors around staff engagement, and alongside that, we're also starting to think around actually what do we do in terms of data, so that when the decision's made, we can share that data and we can use it intelligently. As I said, we are working with districts, and again, one of the work streams there is around thinking around the resourcing. How do we make the best out of kind of everyone who works in Norfolk councils? And as soon as we start to know what the decision is, and again, we've got to remember that once we have the decision, it is still a 2-year period. As we move and as the shadow authorities are elected, they will then look to put in place the chief exec for their authority. The early, the kind of bed that will allow that to happen is being put in place now. The relationships between HR colleagues in different authorities is strong and is being built on. And once we know that decision, that then allows that slightly more detailed project plan, because obviously what we've got to allow is the new authority, the new shadow authority, and as Councillor Price said, it may be very different, is for them to elect their to appoint their senior management team, and then for that senior management team to set the structures that they feel appropriate. Thank you.
No mention of joint machinery with the trade unions or any of the staff organisations. How on earth do you think you're going to get that through without the unions?
So absolutely, they would be picked up. We are not in that design phase yet, though.
Okay, thank you, committee. I'll bring the discussion to the end. I'll just take you to page 19 of the agenda and 2.6, the discussion points for the select committee, and I'll sum up around those particular discussion groups. On discussion point 1, I think we're generally agreed, aren't we, in terms of the role of this committee in carrying out the overarching scrutiny role and our role in referring matters to other select committees if that is appropriate. I think we're generally agreed on that one. On discussion point 2, sorry, excuse me. Appendix A assumes this committee will carry out scrutiny of the LGR programme alongside its existing scrutiny role, on the basis that this will support cross-cutting and common issues to be more effectively scrutinised. I think, again, we pick up on that. But I think the point which I'll take, I'll just take a sip of water, is that next point about potentially subgroups, which is a point which I think I'll take away as chair and discuss with the other chairs of select committees as to how perhaps we get a more dynamic member structure once actually we know what the decision is going to be. Are committee content with that? Thank you.
So we've got a time scale.
On a time
and what are you going to do to report back?
Well, I would hope it to be reporting back at the next committee meeting and as a matter arising as to where those discussions have got to. Discussion point 3 is about omissions from Appendix A. I think 2 bits which we picked up is the importance of the risk register and that being formed at a very early stage within this process once the decision is known, and the committee would want oversight of that. And secondly, around the comms which will be going out once we know what the decision is going to be, the minded to decision, and we've had assurance that that's going to go out literally on the day to staff so that they know where we are. All content?
Chair, I think we ought to specify financial as well as risk, because I think that should feature very high.
Thank you. That point is taken about the financial aspect, and I'm sure officers will take that on board. Discussion point 4 is around training and support. I think where we're leaning to there is the fact that there will need to be a comprehensive programme for new councillors when elections happen in May, not just to get them up to speed, but to get them sprinting as far as LGR is concerned. I think that's certainly not going to be work wasted if there's not elections, because I think it can equally be applied to existing councillors if elections do not actually take place. So we look forward to seeing a comprehensive programme drawn up as far as engagement and training goes, and that then knocks on into discussion point 5. Is there anything I've missed significantly from those first 5 discussion groups? In which case then we go over to page 21 and discussion point 6, which is about the appendices around risks. We've noted that that's a work in progress and that we expect further work to be done and drilling down in that risk register when we've actually got the minded to decision through from government. We have mentioned particular risks around both the finances and around our own companies, which are areas which the committee would probably want to look at sooner rather than later within this process. All content, committee? Absolutely fine. Okay, thank you. Okay, our recommendation is to review and consider the information set out in the report, in particular specific discussion points set out in 2.6 and 3.8 to enable officers to put appropriate arrangements and support in place. Are we content that we've done that, committee? We're all content. Thank you very much indeed. In which case we go on to item 8, which is a review of companies' governance. And is this you, Kat?
Okay, so good morning. In front of you is a paper on the review of companies' governance. So this is a continuation of a conversation that we've been having at this committee. So essentially last time we talked to you, we brought you the guidance. So there's national guidance, and then there's also guidance which has been designed to be specifically in terms of Norfolk County Council. And during that session, I had lots of questions about how do all the kind of relevant pieces come into play? You know, how does this committee work with the audit committee, with the company's governance panel, and with the Cabinet's decision making? So what we've done as officers is we've gone away and had a look at all of that and said, well, how can we make sure that all these pieces are working together nicely and smoothly to get the right outcome at the right time? And how do we ensure that everybody's got the information they need to scrutinise or consider those companies effectively? So as you'll see from the paper, we've done a little bit of work around streamlining some of those processes, making sure they're neat and tidy. And so it's really coming back to you to say, what do you think of the work we've done so far? What training and support could we give for you to feel that you're in a really good place to be able to scrutinise those companies? And is there anything else that we haven't thought about, or any comments that you want to make around the direction the work is going? And also, what kind of papers would you like to receive as a committee? And how often, essentially, do you want regular deep dive papers? Do you want a kind of overall sort of RAG status or an overall performance status type paper? That will help us formulate those next steps. And obviously we don't in that ignore the discussion we've just had about LGR and the role that might play in considering those companies and those risks, and what role this committee might play in that as well. If that's okay, Chair, I'll hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. I think probably all of us, actually, when we look at paragraph 2.2 and the as-is structure, will all agree that that's not how things should be at all, and things we need to be able to do better than that. I'll put it over to members then. Who would like to go first? I've got Councillor Kiddle-Morris and Councillor Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Kat, for the report. Enthralling reading. I did write below the black and white diagram confusing, but I have a question about two questions. One is, should not the Audit Committee and Governance Committee sit alongside the this committee rather than as an addition to this committee. I mean, surely they are parallel rather than one after the other or one before the other. So that's a comment. The other comment I wrote down somewhere was I couldn't find out where the local partnership LATCO guidance came from.
Link to the local partnerships LATCO guidance. It was guidance commissioned by the government, the standard for local authority companies. So I'd be very happy to send round a direct link to that guidance to the whole committee if that assists. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I sit on the Audit and Governance Committee as well, so that's why I asked that question.
Thank you. I think we've all attended events and seminars about the difference between scrutiny and audit and the very different roles that those two committees perform. I think it's absolutely right in that point that actually they do sit parallel in any new structure. Councillor Kemp.
Yes, thank you for the work that you've all done for this report. Looking at the to-be process, it seems to me that all the pre-scrutiny processes are below the line. They won't be held in public, and they won't. The information won't necessarily come to all members, and that does concern me. We could increase.
So obviously, when we're discussing, if we're looking at detailed information around the companies, so if you're looking at their accounts, for example, as we know, the accounts on Companies House are basically always a year after the event in order to preserve that confidentiality, which is hence why much of a discussion is done below the line, as it were. And so here, obviously, we've set up a working group type arrangement rather than have a scrutiny committee that then has to meet below the line. I think it's important that at this scrutiny committee you do get enough information to have that transparency, but clearly I can't cross the line into, I wouldn't want to cross the line into sharing confidential information which could affect the business interests of any of the companies, which would then ultimately affect the business interests of the council. So I'm very happy if during your discussion about how perhaps we could report in a way that's most meaningful to you as a committee, we can perhaps talk about where does that line sit and what information can I bring you, which gives you enough general information, but perhaps doesn't take it down into anything that's commercially sensitive, perhaps with a view to, at a point it may be appropriate for this committee to meet on a deep dive in a way that is exempt. But I'm afraid, I know that kind of gives you lots of bits and pieces there. It's difficult, there's no very easy answer to that. I can't say we'll meet every time absolutely in public, if to meet would mean the disclosure of papers which could damage the business interests of the council or of those companies. Thank you.
So, Chair, how would members gain assurance that the direction of companies' travel for its wholly owned companies were going to underpin the objectives and aims of the council as a whole and our corporate plan? Is there any sort of other bolt and braces way we could underpin something to make sure that there was more oversight?
If I may. I think we can do you a high-level report. So if what you wanted to come back here was that kind of comparison of, is the company meeting what the council's aims and objectives are, I don't think there's any problem at all with publishing that and that being available publicly to you all to discuss in a public arena. Absolutely not. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a difficult one, isn't it, in terms of that level of confidentiality and how scrutiny meets that, and the point that, for example, papers can come to a cabinet meeting which are exempt, which members of a scrutiny committee don't see before the cabinet makes a decision. How on earth can a scrutiny committee call something in if it hasn't seen the papers? It's those sorts of questions which get very difficult, I think, within these arrangements. I'll go over to Councillor Morphew.
Thank you, and that's exactly one of the points I was going to make, and we have actually got a live issue going on for an item that's at Cabinet this week, which will get called in, but I've no idea what it is I'm calling in. And I'm grateful for the work that the monitoring officer has put into this in their explanation, which was a very lawyerly explanation. You can take that as a compliment if you like. But we did need to get to grips with this because very clearly, as it is at the moment, is all a bunch of smoke and mirrors. And effectively, we see nothing out of this. And there is just a mismatch of various bodies, none of which actually are quite clear about what it is they're supposed to be doing, and none of whom have got what seems to be responsibility for doing it. For example, there's a whole pile of things that are missing. The statutory guidance, or the guidance from the national guidance, actually says there should be a statement of purpose for these local authority wholly owned companies. None of those wholly owned companies that we've got have got a current statement of purpose. None of them. All of them have got shareholder letters. They're all confidential. And actually the ones that I've seen, certainly the companies panel, that doesn't actually tell us very much. I'm not going to tell you what's in them because I'm not going to get into trouble for doing that. But they're not terribly informative. And nobody else gets to look at them. And what we've got here is the to-be process seems to me to be a process rather than substantive. And it feels a bit like rearranging the smoke and mirrors rather than actually giving us a clear process. Now, I mean, we've already got the question about what does audit do compared to scrutiny? Yeah, okay, they work in parallel. That's quite right. They're different functions. But what are their different functions? You know, how do they interact? Because there is clearly some overlap there and we don't want to see duplication. But we do need to know what audit responsibilities are compared to the scrutiny responsibilities. We do need to know what the corporate governance panel does and its relationship with scrutiny and audit and cabinet. And we're still not really clear about that because we've yet to see any reports from the governance panel going to cabinet. So what is the reporting line? And I think it's all very well and helpful for officers to take us this far, but I actually think it's for members to decide how far we take it from here. And I think rather than actually making a decision on this now, because it is so fundamental, because there's so much at stake with the size, the workforce, and the LGR implications of the wholly owned companies, that we probably need to have a member working group made up of people from audit, from this committee, and from the company's governance panel to see whether or not this is going to work and where the problems are within this so that we can get the basis set up. Now, we can do that quickly. Certainly, there is an overlap on the membership. I know at least me and Councillor Proctor on the governance panel. We've heard there are others on the audit committee. Let's get the members together and decide what it is we want. And if there are some wicked issues about how do we deal with exempt information, then at least get them somehow codified so that we know what happens, what's likely to be considered to be exempt, and what process we go through. If we feel the need to challenge it, or if we feel the need to consider it as exempt information below the line as the committee. But I think this is, all it's doing is basically pushing it down the line, creating exactly the same problems as we've got now, but just with the words moved around.
Okay, nothing to come back on there. Okay, Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chair. So I've done audit for like 8 years and, you know, chaired the committee. So I've got quite a good understanding of the other side of this conversation. And this is my first time ever on scrutiny. So, you know, it's, you know, not my strong area. But what I would say is that, you know, councils try their very best to kind of like do best by their people and do best by the constraints that they have, you know, and so we you know, acknowledge that, right? But, you know, there's often weaknesses in businesses set up by councils because there's a weakness in a commercial kind of brain of a council in its inherent nature to actually get the kind of terms right and to get the kind of ethos right when you set the mandate for a company. The company will only kind of function within the mandate you set, and if you don't set a good mandate, then you set a weakness, you build a weakness in immediately. And that's a possibility, okay? So the reality is that I have encountered at different times weaknesses in the kind of an initial conception and setup of commercial businesses and which then, from an audit perspective, what you're looking to see if there's if the control system is there, is it up to standard? Is it actually being adhered to? Right. So you kind of like you look at. So, I had a focus because it's an area of risk as an audit committee chair, right? So, I had it as an area of focus, and, often I would find that there were weaknesses which came back. And so they come back in periodic kind of siloed individual ways. And so I always felt it was important that the scrutiny committee is the place to kind of investigate and look for those systemic weaknesses across that are set in the organisational perspective. So I'm fairly new to this council. I've never sat an audit at this council, and I've never done scrutiny at this council. So this can't be the first time, okay, that audit have been like looking at companies, okay, and this is the first time a scrutiny committee is discussing concerns about all businesses we own, and then done something about it. So I'm assuming that you've kind of had conversations in the past where you've looked for sort of systemic weaknesses in our approaches to businesses. And if that's not happened, and my question is, why hasn't that happened? Okay, so from my perspective, what I would like to do as a new member of scrutiny is to get an understanding of what audit has done over the last few years in terms of monitoring and investigating companies that we hold, and what those audit reports have said and recommendations, and what's come out of those recommendations. But equally, scrutiny and audit need to work well together, and that's something I worked on at Norwich, okay, and I hope that we have a good relationship with audit here, but there does feel a distance here, a little bit of a distance, okay. So if audit have been reporting, if audit haven't been looking at its businesses, it hasn't been doing its job properly, and it hasn't been looking at that risk, and that's an opinion from me, right? And so if it hasn't done it, it should do it. And if we've got concerns about businesses and it hasn't been doing it, we should be recommending audit do investigations into its companies, okay? If it has done the work and it has reported weaknesses, why haven't they then come to scrutiny, okay? So we need to understand what they've looked at and why those haven't been reported through to us, so that we can look at the more general level of how the organisation interacts with its businesses. So to pick up on Councillor Morphew's point, right, yes, a working group could well need to be established based upon looking at, do the companies align with our thinking and our ethos? Are they performing to a good level? Are they a risk for the council? And also just the overall sort of terms and conditions of those kind of agreements that we have, are they actually sound? Are they safe? And do the officer class at the council have the capabilities to kind of, and skills and training to kind of instigate and then have an oversight of instigate these companies and have an oversight of the relationship between the two, right? So we need to look at those weaknesses. Oh my God, it's a fire. Is that just to shut me up, Chair?
Meeting adjourned. Welcome back to the adjourned Strategic and Corporate Select Committee. I am asked why do we do the fire alarm announcement at the beginning of every meeting, and now you can see why. Now, like a good referee in a football match, we'll resume exactly where the ball was in play when the play stopped. And I think, Councillor Price, you were just concluding.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just making brief points about how at audit you can find issues individually, but then there can be a more systemic theme. And so I was requesting that we get to see what kind of reports have happened by audit. And if audit haven't been doing those reports and investigating the companies, then that's a concern we should be sharing back. But ultimately, if there are a set of reports where we've seen weaknesses in the control mechanisms and also in kind of administration from the council, and also it not reflecting our ethoses, then that could be a wider piece of work. It could be an item agenda at some point on the work programme where we look at that and then look at what recommendations we make back to officers and to audit in terms of the governance and structure of these businesses. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Price. I can't speak for the Audit and Governance Committee in terms of where they're coming from on this issue, but as far as this committee is concerned, the Scrutiny Committee picked this up as a work item last year in its work programme, and this is part of the development of that work programme, which has then moved on into this committee. I've got Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose that the starting point for me is this is another step in improving the situation as it was before, particularly with regard to the information that will now flow from the company's governance panel to Cabinet as the ultimate decision makers. So I think that's an important point. But just sort of go back a bit from there, there's a reference in paragraph 4.1 about greater proactivity from LATCOs to improve internal governance. So I suppose the question there is, are we satisfied that each of the LATCOs or the various companies that we have a shareholding interest in, mostly 100%, are doing the right things in terms of governance? Because we've got obviously Norse, Hethel, Repton and Independence Matters as the four key ones. Now they've all got boards, they've all got NEDs on them apart from Independence Matters as far as I know. So there should be proper governance around it. So the question there is, are we satisfied that the governance procedures that they follow are correct? That's point one. And I'm pleased also that in paragraph 4.2, just under that, there's a reference to what's going to have to happen when we move on to unitary status about what will happen with the various companies. And that goes back to the other item we were talking about with LGR. But I suppose where I'm sort of trying to get to from this is a step in improving things. I think some of the comments been made sort of amplify that, and there's still quite a way to go to actually get it right. But if you think we'll go back to the where it all starts from in terms of the information coming from the companies to the governance panel, making sure that the decision makers, i.e. Cabinet, are involved, and then where there's wider issues that comes to this committee in terms of overall governance as opposed to more detailed goings on in terms of the company itself, because that's down to the company's governance panel. So I would suggest, Chairman, we are actually making a step forward in terms of the overall overall situation, what we want to see improved. I think there's probably a bit more can be done, and that's really around Cabinet taking notice of what comes from the governance panel to ensure that recommendations from there, when there are recommendations made, are actually enacted. And also there's been an occasion when the company's governance panel has made a recommendation that officers would need to respond to as well, but to make sure that that response is actually made, as opposed to say, well, that's it, and Cabinet will be taking whatever decision they're going to take on it. It has got to make sure that the decision-making process is right. So that's where I'd come on from this, Chairman, and perhaps the last point, really, in terms of the overall governance, is that the business plans are in the public domain. They do come to Cabinet for approval normally sort of February, March time, ready for the new financial year. So at least there's something there of what the companies are doing for the future that comes into the public domain.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think all authorities with arm's length companies find this a difficult situation in as much as, I mean, I can only really relate it to companies that were incepted in West Norfolk when I was leader of West Norfolk Borough Council. And I'll use the example of the housing companies because we had to formulate a not-for-profit housing association type outfit to deal with some very specialist housing that the local providers of social housing, that wasn't in their sort of business plan to run these sort of units to sort of help people who need emergency housing, and obviously kept people out of you know, emergency accommodation, bed and breakfast and so on. I was the leader of the council at the time. I knew what the company was incepted for. We also had a for-profit housing company, and I knew what that direction of that was and the reason behind that and what we wanted from that. But I was also the chairman of the company. And so there was commonality between what the aims were politically and the direction that the company needed to take to deliver those goals. Now, separate to that, the process was changed, and they introduced a system, you know, not dissimilar to what we have here. And I stood down as being chairman of the companies at that point in time. I was no longer leader of the council. But the thing that I think we all need, and this is a long way of getting towards where I need to be on this, we need a methodology that says that's what the housing company you know, that's what its goal is, to deliver this many houses, that many sales, generate that much money. That's their business plan. And in terms of scrutinising it, whether it's this body or a separate body or whatever, have they done what they said on the tin? What were they set up for? Build some houses. How many have they built? What have we achieved? And those straightforward facts and figures on something like that, you know, I would suggest it's quite easy to have, you know, performance data on how those companies are performing, separate to the actual running of the company and running of the business. I think this proposed changes moves a little bit towards that. I think as scrutiny and carrying out the scrutiny function, I think we would be, you know, right to almost have a deep dive as we have with the other performance panels in the past. We had, you know, deep dives on the scrutiny that happened as to how individual parts of the business are performing. Now, obviously, Norse is a very much bigger beast, a lot more diverse in what it does, and that's going to be a bigger challenge. But all we need to know is that those companies are doing what they were set up for. And if the purpose of the company changes, then the methodology needs to be there so that we're scrutinising what we should be doing and not the perception of what they were set up for originally, because their raison d'etre has changed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. No other members have indicated at this stage, but Councillor Morphew is sort of stretching and getting into position.
Yes, Chair, I was going to take you back to my proposal that we should have some sort of a working group with the involvement of the other member parties to this, the governance panel and audit, to try and make sure that we are clear about what our relative responsibilities are, because I take the point that this does move us forward a bit, but I don't think it takes us forward enough. And I think we need to make sure that we've got a pathway to ensure that we do continue with the process of taking this forward. Otherwise, it's going to get us nowhere further forward. I take the point about the business plans coming to the cabinet meetings, but actually they're not terribly detailed. And if you look at the cabinet, look at the business plans that came to the previous meetings, they were certainly not as detailed as I would like to have seen them in public. And certainly the contents of them didn't actually reflect a lot of the stuff which actually happens in practice. And when you look at some of the activities that are going on and the proposals, and let's take Norse as an example, I mean, we're in a position where it is the biggest LatCo in the company, it's losing money, it's proposing to sell off a whole part of its activities at the moment. Who's looking at it? It's Cabinet. We're not. The company's own governance panel aren't. Audit don't seem to be at the moment. So there's a very big decision going on that none of us have had any activity around pre-scrutiny. A lot of the papers are exempt. Where are we? And I don't think this actually takes us far enough forward to be able to deal with those sorts of things. It's a kind of quite a big issue, but there are other issues around independence matters. They've got a particular purpose, or supposed to have a particular purpose in life, and yet the council didn't give them some of the contracts which we would normally have expected them to get. Where was the scrutiny around all of that lot? There was none. So there's lots of things that are within the process that has not served members, or I think the public, terribly well. I'm not sure it's served the companies terribly well, to be perfectly honest. And I don't see anything in here which gives me a definitive answer. And I think what other people have said is it takes us a bit further forward. Well, okay, fine. What's the next stage is, how do we get to a point where we have actually tackled this and we have got some certainty? And we haven't got an awful lot of time because we have got local government reorganisation. There will be people, the new unitary authority or authorities, crawling all over the locally owned companies and the wholly owned companies. And doubtless there will be arguments about should they be part of the strategic order, structural order, and when it comes, or are actually the new unitaries going to look at some of these loss-making companies and go, hang on a minute, I don't think we want these. And I think that's going to be a very interesting challenge for us over the summer, and one that we need to get in front of.
Not making any comment on Councillor Morphew's points there, but just to clear up, and it was mentioned by Councillor Price as well around audit, just to give members the reassurance that audit do look at the companies on an annual basis, and as do our external auditors. Now, how that flow through of information, I'm not, making a point there at all. I'm just telling you factually that that is the case. Thank you.
Thank you. I think from the committee that what I'm hearing is that we certainly a sense that things are stepping in the right direction, and I think the matter of dispute is actually, is it a big enough step, and what the next step should be after that. There is a proposal from Councillor Morphew around a potential working group to take some work forward. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to go back to Councillor Morphew and just ask if he wants to put any more flesh on the bones of that proposal.
Yeah, it's going out into the cold didn't help a great deal with the voice. I think probably I would suggest that it should be the chairs of audit, the governance panel, and this committee should get together to look to see what a suitable structure for a working group in terms of reference would be to take this forward to the next stage, to make sure that we have got clarity between the functions of each of the different parts, how they relate to the decision-making process, and how members are involved, and leave it to the chairs of the three committees to establish a suitable working group with membership drawn from their three committees as they see fit.
Okay, thank you. So what you're proposing is that a working group is drawn up, but it comes to the chairs of audit, myself under this committee, and the company's governance panel to come together to draw up a terms of reference for that working group. But reports into where is the question?
Well, I would suggest here, if we're taking the oversight of it, but I'm sure that all three bodies would have something to say.
That certainly makes sense, because it would be essentially this committee's working group, wouldn't it, and reporting into here. So that's the proposal from Councillor Morphew then, that we do have a working group, that the terms of reference are drawn up between myself, the chair of audit, and the chair of the company's governance panel. Discussion on that. I'll second it formally from the chair, so we don't need to go through that. Any thoughts on that? Councillor Proctor.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at this from the point of view of improvement, this actually helps to, or this would help to define who is doing what, how, etc. So to start it off with the chairs of the three committees involved, to me makes a lot of sense. If we're looking for improvement on this, and also as an assurance for us all that all the things that need to be done are being done, then this is probably, to my mind, a step in the right direction. So I'd go with it as well.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Long.
I think, given the point that I made earlier, this suggestion will again help to improve the overall governance. There'll be that dialogue between, the chairs of the three committees, and actually aid us when it reports back to know that, what's being said on the tin is what's being done, and I think that's an important way forward and will aid the process. So I'm supportive of what's been proposed.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp.
Yes, I'm supportive of setting up a working group, and seeing as we reference the local partnerships guidance on local authority companies, I think it would have been really helpful to have reproduced it here in the scrutiny agenda. And in fact, it does include a whole list of questions, 10 questions for members of scrutiny committees, interrogating the facts and the risks and the sufficient clarity regarding the approach to managing the company. I think that would be really, really good. I'm not going to read them all out, but I think this is something that the working group and the committee needs to look at, Chair.
Indeed. I'm just going to turn to Mr. Hopper. Are you satisfied you've captured what the proposal is?
I've captured it.
You've captured it. Okay. In that respect, then, members, those in favour, please. Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we've done that. Any other further points or discussion on this item, please? Nobody is indicating. So as far as what we've been asked to do today, number one is to review and suggest any changes to proposed arrangements to improve the company's governance process at Norfolk County Council. We've done that. We've agreed that we're setting up a working group and the processes around that. Number two, to comment on how member training and oversight could be improved under the new proposed arrangements. We haven't particularly done that, but we'll note that the request has happened, but we've chosen not to address that today. Are we all content? We're all content. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, which takes us on then to item number 9, which is Financial Regulations Update 2026 and a report from the Director of Strategic Finance.
Thank you, Chair. This is an annual report which, as you've just said, updates the financial regulations. We bring it to you as good practice. There are, I would say, it's a light touch update this year in terms of some minor changes which are just making the regulations a little bit explicit, whereas previously perhaps they've been implicit. But I've got nothing further to add and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say from the chair how much members welcome and enjoy a track to change report when these things come through. It really is great. Any questions or comments, members? Councillor Price.
Yeah, no, just briefly, Harvey, thanks for the report. So what I've noticed at Norwich City Council is as new regulations come in each year, it puts more and more strain on the financial officers to produce their reports and the statement of accounts, etc., to a higher and higher standard. So could you comment about any kind of resource stresses and pressures that's having for your team, and also how, if that has any or knock-on effect on your day-to-day work or closing of accounts or new budgetary states? And then could you make a sort of slightly wider comment about those additional regulations that not only are here but have been introduced just in the most recent of times, how that impacts kind of the external audit process, and how you're feeling the external audit process is happening at this council with your external auditors. So just brief comments on that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Yes, we, I think if you don't work in local government, people think it's very staid and doesn't change very much, but we are constantly dealing with change and having to adjust. So yes, governments of whatever political persuasion always come in and give us new legislation to follow and challenges to address. So it's something that I'm very mindful of, and also that we look at in terms of the level of resources that we have to make certain that we can keep the organisation financially resilient and robust. In terms of the wider audit and external auditors, we went to had our Audit and Governance Committee last week, which the auditors considered the 24-25 accounts, and the Audit Committee approved those, and the auditors gave their initial view on them. There's a little bit more work to complete. At this point in time, I've got no concerns around that process. As you highlighted, the regime that the auditors work in becomes more challenging for them, with they're being asked to address higher standards. That means that they ask of higher standards of us. We have a close working relationship with our auditor colleagues or external audit colleagues, and at the moment in time I'm content that we have sufficient resources to address what we need to do, but I'm also mindful that changes keep happening, and it's something that I keep under review in terms of making certain that the there is good stewardship of the council's finances, as you would expect me to do. Thank you.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I don't particularly have a problem with these for the updates, but when I'm reading through them, and certainly around the 512 companies, trusts and charities element, on page 74, I kept on thinking to myself, why isn't this in here already? And I was a bit surprised at the relative weakness of the proposals, or the what's there, what was there, and what is going to be there, which made me look a bit further at that. And what it doesn't talk about, certainly in terms of things like the governance arrangements being clearly defined and documented, which is the third bullet point of 512A, against what criteria? And I think we maybe need to say what the criteria is that they should be considered against, and maybe it should be the LATCO guidance, the strategic guidance which we were talking about, the national guidance which we were talking about earlier, to try and make sure that they are clearly defined and well documented against suitable standards. There's also nothing in there that I can find, and I might have missed it, about specific statement of purpose for the wholly owned companies, reviewing that on a regular basis to make sure that it is still doing what they were set up to do, or has been aligned with current objectives. It does talk about ensure alignment. It doesn't talk about review and making sure that there is a fundamental statement of purpose to show the alignment that's there. And it also doesn't talk about, well, it talks about dissolution of county councils companies, but it doesn't talk about the selling on and breaking up of county councils companies, and I think there should be a reference to that. So perhaps between now and it arriving for change, and I guess this is a change that will go to council, perhaps the director could have a look at those points and see whether or not they could be included.
Yes, I'm happy to have a look at them. I was also mindful when we were drawing this of your earlier item, and that changes may come out of that, and there's an element of not trying to prejudge them. So it was trying to get a balance. Clearly, it is as your committee has shown a key interest for you. So, as I said, what we've tried to do is reflect probably more explicitly some of the things that are current practice and write them down. But I take on board the point that there are always further areas that you can improve. But I also didn't want to prejudge some of the other work that we've just been discussing. So it's getting the balance. But yes, we'll have another look at the wording. But I think broadly, from my perspective, I'm content that they will get us to the right place. And clearly, if there is a weakness or an area we can improve, then that's why we bring them to you every year to pick that up and change that. But I'm reasonably comfortable that they will enable the council to do what they need to do to demonstrate good governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
I note within section 5.8, I mean, it makes reference to donations, and obviously we have to have a policy and a plan on how we deal with donations, and it outlines it very clearly. But I just wonder, what donations do we, or have we received? I've been around here a few years and I've never heard or seen a report or even seen a budget line, probably, not noticed it, where donations and bequests and legacies and maybe physical assets have been transferred to us, but definitely I can't remember any financial donations or legacies or bequests. But Harvey may well know we have lots of legacies and bequests.
Does that cover sponsorships as well, that point?
Again, this is just being about proportional. We do occasionally get donations of land and things when looking at capital assets and things of that nature. It is not frequent. We also do have one or two historic legacies and charities and trust funds, although we've in the I've got to say, I would say recent past, it's probably a bit longer than that now, but we did do a tidy up exercise where some of those have been transferred to others who are better placed to manage those, and we went through a process of tidying up the very charities and trust funds that have been left to us. So it's not something I wouldn't say there are a significant amount, but occasionally we do receive donations, and I can also think, if I take it outside the narrow world of finance, the Castle Museums and things of that nature do get donations and things of that nature. So there are various things, and this is just meant to be a guide to how we record them and make certain that we treat them appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that explains that.
Learn something new every day, Chairman. Thank you.
Indeed. Councillor Dygan.
I was just going to point out that Harvey covered it. The museums sometimes get donations of often physical items, and also I think the old Norfolk Windmills Trust charity, which is effectively a county charity, has, I think, in recent times got a couple of bequests. So it does occur.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any other members wish to speak on this item? In which case, what we're being asked to do is to consider the proposed amendments to the financial regulations and recommend these to Council. Are we content? All agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, which brings us then on to item 10, which is the Forward Work Programme. What if I can highlight in advance that a change has occurred to the report since the papers were published. It relates to recommendation 2, which recommended that the Strategic Development Oversight Group is discontinued. Conversations between the Chief Fire Officer and responsible Cabinet member have since indicated that it would be preferable for this group to continue until after the HMIC FRS inspection, which is anticipated for May, and that its role and remit should be reviewed following that point once there is greater clarity on the direction of travel for LGR and devolution. So just to make that clear. And over to you, Ms. Hopper.
Thank you, Chair. So, that one point aside, I just had two things for committee to consider today. The first is obviously that you might have seen the papers from Cabinet that the Better Together for Norfolk review has come out now. That's something for this committee and indeed other committees to consider as part of their work programming to look at. I know there had been requests previously from this committee to programme that in, so it would be over to committee to decide when they would like that to come. Also, there's been a request to move the fire scrutiny item, which is currently scheduled for July, further forward to March, again, so that could be looked at in advance of that inspection that the Chair just mentioned. So that's another item for committee to consider, pardon me, in the realm of the work programming, and for committee to take those decisions forward. So I would like committee to consider those two items, please, when considering their work programme. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Taking them back to front, anybody got any issue or problems with the fire scrutiny coming forward to March? I didn't think there would be.
We might need to move something just to highlight it's quite busy.
In terms of what we've got for March, we've got policy framework, we've got constitution, and we've got a standing item on Devo and LGR, which I think hopefully might be quite meaty by then. We hope. I think there's a sense of unknowns here, because I think the policy framework and the constitution item were both kind of there as that we need to kind of have a wash up before a new council potentially comes in. So I do wonder when otherwise we would be considering those items, or whether or not they would slip, or we would entrust our newly elected members to get their heads around those very quickly, alongside everything else that they'll be doing. Any thoughts in the room? Councillor Long, Councillor Morphew.
Chairman, there comes a point where you have to sort of say, we've got a full work programme, and those that come after us will have to take up the mantle. But on my select committee, you know, we are populating that forward agenda with work, you know, purposefully, so that those that come after us will you know, have a stab at what things need to be looked at. So I think that fits true with this one as well. So if we start programming stuff for July and beyond, then so be it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think we can't preempt and make decisions on behalf of those who come after. But I think there's no reason why we shouldn't give some sort of a steer. And whilst it is a work programme, it's a work programme that can be changed. And I think if we know that there are decisions that could need to be made in May, then we need to line ourselves up to make sure that they can be made if they need to be, and you know, thereafter. And we hand it on to whoever may or may not follow us. Depends on what happens, but I think there has to be a degree of flexibility given the degree of uncertainty that there is, and if we are giving ourselves sort of powers over looking at LGR and the rest of it, in a sense, we can wind all of the consequences of everything else that happens into that to make sure that we do cover the issues that need to be covered in the way that is timely.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
I think, Mr. Chairman, that actually it could be up to you. Actually, you know, we'll see what happens with LGR, and if we've really got a really meaty item, that then leave it for your discretion. That maybe you move some items further down the agenda. We've already moved the fire service into that meeting as well. So I think maybe in consultation with officers and maybe the vice chair, then you could make that decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're all agreed that the fire item is going to move forward to March. We've not yet agreed about whether or not anything will move out of March, but we'll get another chew at this, won't we, next month anyway. Councillor Price.
Yeah, no, just briefly, I don't disagree with it moving into March, if it's time sensitive and it's required in that respect. But I don't want to underestimate the importance of the 3 items that we've got on there. And as you said, the LGR one, I should fully expect it to be quite we will know a lot more by then, you know. So we have to consider the length of the meeting and whether or not we bring the fire item, have it at the end of the agenda, and whether or not we choose to postpone it during the meeting as well. So I mean, that is another option. But the first 3, you know, they're red lines. We can't not do that work beforehand. So yeah, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
I mean, one question which I would pose is in terms of the fire scrutiny, whether or not actually, you know, it is an important item, but at the moment it's just going to be put in on the end, as it were, of a very meaty agenda. It's the sort of thing that I would have thought could be discussed during a politically sensitive period, because it's not one which would particularly cause any waves on that. That potentially we would look to have another meeting in April.
Should we take that away and look at that?
Shall we take that away and look at it? Yep. But we'll certainly be bringing it forward. Councillor Kemp.
Yes, Chair, it seems to me that the item on the March agenda, the review of NCC Constitution, seeing as we're coming to an end of the term of office, that really that ought to come in May. So maybe we could put the fire service in, replacing that item. I don't know if there are any urgent things that need to be done to the Constitution, but I haven't seen any report coming forward, and it seems a little bit previous putting it on right at the end, just before elections.
All right, executive decision from the chair. The Constitution goes back to July. Content with that? Okay, that's fine. We'll leave it as it is, but we will consider the possibility, depending on how meaty the LGR and Devo item is going to be in March, hopefully very, about whether or not fire then needs to come onto its own separate meeting. Are we all content with that? What about Better Together for Norfolk? Is that something which folk want to see on the work programme? Councillor Morphew.
Can I get clarification? I mean, it is part of the policy framework and theoretically has run out. Do we need to formally renew it as part of the policy framework, or is it all right to just turn to say it is okay to do it in 2 or 3 months. I look to the monitoring officer for guidance.
I'll have to double check on what's coming through, whether there's actually an ask for renewal onto the policy framework. Is that the case, Tristan?
There hasn't been one, but the point is that I think we've come up to the end of it, so
Right.
it's something for this committee to consider before it goes on to Cabinet.
Right, okay. So the position is that I don't think there's necessarily a formal ask. There's something there for the committee to consider. Thank you.
As a matter of principle, I've always been unhappy with the idea that items on the policy framework that have passed their sell-by date and renewal date are just left to continue without some sort of formal recognition. I absolutely get where we're at the moment, and I'm not looking for a bundle and reopening it and all the rest of the stuff, but I do think there needs to be some sort of formal decision to make sure that it stays within the policy framework envelope.
That's all noted. Thank you. Okay, then, in terms of action required, okay, we've considered the forward work programme, subject to the revisions which we've discussed within this meeting. We're all content. And the new number 2 on our action required is about the Strategic Development Oversight Group continuing until post-inspection and then for it to be considered after that. We're content. Thank you. Okay, that's the end of that item, which then brings us to the question of exempt minutes. And what I have to ask the committee before we potentially go into private session or not is, having considered the exempt meeting, could you confirm whether you are confident that the committee can approve the exempt minutes without discussing the contents? We are content to pass those minutes, in which case they are passed and we don't need to go into private session. Okay, thank you very much. I believe that that is the end of the meeting. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.